Thank you, Professor Madonsela. It's Viswan Reddy here from MK Party. In your presentation, you put up a quote from Honorable President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, in which he said in 2024 that we are nearing the end of 10 years of state capture. I know you have been very vocal about state capture. You've mentioned it in your presentation, but I think the important thing that you emphasize is the question of ethical leadership. And I think we need to be able to deal with this question effectively. We need to go right back. And I'd like to pose a very pointed question to you, and I would like to get your views on this. And this relates to pre-1994, when the government was about to be formed, when it became known in business circles that certain individuals from the ANC would occupy leadership positions in the country. The leader of government business at the time was Ramaphosa. And we found that prior to 1994, he was offered shares in many of the established white-owned companies. My question to you is that, knowing that he was going to come into government and serve a critical role in the government of South Africa, do you think that his acceptance of these shares was an ethical decision? I want to just look at some of the words that you quoted. You said that unethical leadership could be where benefits are accrued to someone who does not deserve them. Now, these were free shares, in inverted commas, and later we realized that many of the companies that had offered him these shares are actually companies that relied on government decisions to stay afloat and to exist and to entrench their influence in South Africa post-democracy. I thank you, Professor, and thank you for that presentation.
Thank you, Sam.
We take one more. One more, please. Chair, the chair of the committee, please.
Thank you, Principal, and I want to greet Prof. Madonsela and really want to appreciate your time to come and do your presentation. I want to also appreciate it on behalf of the committee. I believe all members are happy to hear from yourself. Let me shoot straight to the question that I want to pose to yourself. One, the issue of the procedure and the processes that we need to follow, in particular when you do your public participation, when for any act or the law that we want to put it in the plenary. You know, in many cases where members amongst yourselves, it's amongst ourselves, by the way, this is the capacity building to equip ourselves as members of the committee. We don't want to divert to something personal outside of what we must do as members of the committee. You have many scenarios where when we do participation and one of us feels like his or her views are being suppressed, but and feels like whatever that has been rejected by a committee, that person or a member must rush to court. And these processes that you've been talking about, or procedure, it takes a long route. How best can we try to minimize that so that there's a lot of spending of money? For example, we've been having, Nola, you call it Public Works Bill. Yes, it has been there from the fourth administration, fifth administration, bit like that. But it is based on members of a committee who don't agree to each other. And when they don't agree, one member from a different party, because they feel their views are not heard, they must run to court and it puts everything on hold. Then the next administration, you start afresh. then that leads us to fruitless and wasteful expenditure. So in that case, because you spoke about ethical, being a member myself and not representing or not saying I'm wearing a cap of a particular party, being ethical to yourself, how best can you advise us not to follow a suit or procedure or the culture that always impact on fruitless and wasteful expenditure? The second one is the conflict of interest. I'll make this scenario. If I'm a panel of, I'm part of the panel where we need to interview maybe commissioners, and one of them, it's my friend, my fellow friend, I then disclose or declare to the committee that person I know, the one that we're going to interview, but I don't excuse myself. Why does it have bad implications even though I've disclosed, rather than not to disclose? And if we are running short as panelists, remember when we are a panel, we become, for argument's sake, you are 6. And when you are 6 and I excuse myself, it means the scoring on itself, it gets disturbed. And one of them will not be scored fairly. So in that scenario on its own, how best can we deal with the matter? Lastly, but let me not get into that. It will create a bit of havoc. But thanks. Thank you.
You can respond to those.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, honorable members. Let me start with the first one about the president and shares in companies. And thank you, honorable member, for giving me an opportunity to explain conflict of interest. So conflict of interest exists when you are in a position to dispense opportunities, benefits, and privileges. And among the potential recipients of those benefits, privileges, and opportunities is somebody who, if you benefited that person, you too, you would benefit. So conflict of interest is when you find yourself wearing 2 hats. And they talk about conflict of interest being a position where you serve 2 masters. If you see the course in ethics that the report that is titled A Course in Ethics, and also the Nkandla report, which is Secure in Comfort. It's not if, for example, I think maybe in future I don't know, in future I might end up being the chairperson of Anglo-American, and therefore now I'm sitting in a committee and I get a benefit from them. And then in future I become a chairperson. It doesn't really work like that. Where your scenario works, say, is when somebody throws what in government they refer to as a javelin. You are in government, you sell state properties as people do sell right now. You're talking about land potentially being sold. You sell it to somebody, and then within a very short space of time, you are into that company. So that's called throwing a javelin. Again, our conflict of interest laws have not tightened, but in many countries, they put a timeline within which, a cooling off period, within which you cannot now be employed as a CEO of a company whose debt you excused in questionable circumstances. One of the cases I dealt with was somebody in government who looked the other way when a business was owing the state but ended up having a job in that business. So again, you'll have to look at what was known at the time when the benefit was extended and what gets to be known. So in regard to specifically the case of the president, I would not say there was a conflict of interest, but I would say for all of the people who got shares from companies, the whole scheme was a very questionable scheme, but not for the president, because obviously there's no free lunch. Those who extended benefits to the newly governing, they knew that, or to relatives of the newly governing, they knew that they were planting a seed. So I hope I've clarified that. I don't think there was a conflict of
Just a
interest.
follow-up, if I may. A follow-up, if I may. Thank you. Thank you. Thank
Yes,
you,
sir.
Professor, for that explanation. But I'd just like to interrogate that slightly further. When the president, I take your point that in future, so when he accepted the shares, he was not president or deputy president or not in government. But later he became the deputy president at some point. He was a senior leading figure within the ruling party. And these shares were obviously given to him in the anticipation that when he gets into that position, he would then use it to influence government business. He was head of government business. Now, Professor, do you think that he should have relinquished those shares when he occupied that position in government? I'm looking at the case of the arms deal, for example, where former President Zuma is currently facing charges, but at the time he was the MEC for Economic Affairs in KwaZulu-Natal. So he had no direct influence over the award of that particular tender. So in the eyes of the ordinary man in the street, I want us to see some consistency here. And I want us to be clear about what is this ethical leadership that we speak about. Because a man in the street will say, we have a president who is conflicted in this regard, and then you get another former president who's been taken to court where he does not fit that definition of what we call unethical leadership. I just thought you could clarify that for me. Thank you.
Right. Honorable members, I'm going to make a commitment to send you a link to the OEC guidelines on conflict of interest. The fact that you got a freebie from somebody and then eventually you are in charge of them through the lottery of life does not mean that we can ascribe a conflict of interest to your conduct then retrospectively. We cannot do that. And then you ask, should he have relinquished those shares? I don't think so, because everyone then who had a job, let's forget about shares, because what we're bringing here is one of those philosophical questions around how much is too much. Would you then say anybody who had a job anywhere in civil society can't govern, because when they govern, they would oversee laws that will impact on everyone in civil society, and therefore would only have people in government who've never worked before? Because what's the difference between having worked in a company and having received a benefit from a company? Would we then say Nelson Mandela should not have governed because he got a benefit of living in a house that was given to him by Anglo-American? It really becomes stretched too far. But the issue of President Zuma, and honorable members, forgive me here, I've never understood why President Zuma was prosecuted for the arms deal. There are many things that I disagree with him on. And on the issue of state capture, I stand my ground. But on the issue of the arms deal, you are right that he was a minor player. And it really doesn't make sense to him. He was a minor player in that his influence would have probably have come from his ANC position, as opposed to him being one of the people who were involved in the actual transaction. With the people involved in the actual transaction having not been prosecuted, it remains weird that he was prosecuted, but it's not my place to deal with that. It's up to those who deal with law enforcement to deal with that. I want to go to the second issue, which is